Hey guys, I'm hoping that starting that unit circle practice went okay yesterday. I had you guys just start by doing the sine, cosine, and tangent questions, but I said to skip the ones that lie let me use my highlighter, that lie on these sections. Right? I said to skip those ones because they're special cases. I also need to show you guys how to do the problems that have like secant, cosecant, and cotangent. Really, those you might have been able to do them yesterday because they're similar. You're just using a different proportion. So let's pick up where we left off, and then after today's video, I want you to finish your homework number 8 and submit that, and then you guys will be done for the week. So let's start with going over secant and all that. So let's do a couple questions. Again, all three of these questions are pulled from your homework number 8, so you're more than welcome to use these answers on your assignment when you go to submit them, okay? So if I'm doing cosecant of 7 pi over 4, I go to my unit circle, and 7 pi over 4 is right here. So I'm looking at my blue triangle, the 45, 45, 90 in quadrant 4. It was cosecant. So cosecant is the opposite of sine, right? So sine is usually, if this is my reference angle, sine is usually opposite over hypotenuse, right? So the difference is, since it's cosecant, we're going to do hypotenuse over opposite, right? We're going to flip that ratio. So in this case, the hypotenuse is square root of 2. And opposite is 1, but be careful. Remember, you're going downwards on that 1, so it's actually a negative 1. So this should be square root of 2 over negative 1. Okay, so square root of 2 over negative 1, or if we reduce it, it's just negative square root of 2. So if I take out my answers here, we get negative square root of 2 for that first one. Let's look at secant of negative 2 pi over 3. All right, so I'm going to erase all this stuff here. Okay, negative 2 pi over 3. Well, 2 pi over 3 is right here if you were to go the positive direction, right? So we want to go the negative direction and end in that same position. So we're actually looking at 4 pi over 3, basically. Okay. All right. And we were looking at secant of negative 2 pi over 3. So secant is the opposite of cosine. So if I'm looking at this as my reference angle, cosine is usually adjacent over hypotenuse, right? So if I'm doing secant, I want to do hypotenuse over adjacent. So if I'm looking at this triangle down here, that means I'm going to do 2 over 1, but notice how we're going left, so it's over negative 1. So 2, let me switch my pen here. If it's 2 over negative 1, we would just simplify it and write that as negative 2, which is the answer that we should get. All right, let's look at the last one. Cotangent of 3 pi over 4. Okay, I'm going to erase all this stuff. Okay, so it's regular, just positive 3 pi over 4. So I'm just looking at this guy right here. Okay, and it was cotangent. Well, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So in this case, it's going to be negative 1 over positive 1. Well, negative 1 over positive 1 just reduces to negative 1. And that's where we get that answer from right there, okay? So cosecant, secant, and cotangent is a lot like sine, cosine, and tangent. You're just flip-flopping that ratio. Don't forget, if you end up getting a ratio that's like got a square root of 2 on the bottom or something, don't forget that you need to rationalize that denominator to simplify that ratio, okay? The last thing I want to show you guys are what are called special cases. These ones are kind of goofy. The special cases occur when you're looking at, so I'm going back to my unit circle. I know I keep hopping around. I hope you guys are following along okay. Special cases happen when you have sine, cosine, tangent, all those different kinds of ratios, and they're asking for either of these ones. So they're asking for 2 pi, pi over 2, pi, or 3 pi over 2. Those are special cases. If you remember from our last video, I had you guys write cosine comma sine, and I said I was going to refer back to that, okay? So I'm going to actually go onto my unit circle and write cosine comma sine up at the top so that you remember. And then let's talk about these special cases, and then you guys can work on finishing the rest of your unit 8, homework number 8. So if I'm looking at these special cases, the first one is sine of 0. So we're talking about radians, but 0 radians is the same thing as 0 degrees, okay? So it doesn't actually matter, but technically it's radians. So sine of 0 radians is, okay, well, sine of 0 radians is this line right here. So there's kind of a problem with that, right? There's no triangle. There's no ratio. There's no, hey, this over this. And it's kind of like, okay, well, how am I supposed to write that? Okay, well, if it's sine of that, if you go up here, remember how I had you write cosine comma sine? Now take a look at what I had you label this point as. We labeled this point as 1, 0 if it were on a coordinate grid, right? So which of those two numbers is sine? And it's 0. So sine of 0 radians is equal to 0 in this case. Okay, let's do another one because let me get through all 4 and hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. So let's do sine of pi over 2. Okay, so same idea, but now this time, oh, I didn't mean to actually erase that. Hang on. There we go. This time we want to do sine of pi over 2. Again, notice how there's no triangle that goes with it. So what we do is we say, okay, well, if the point is cosine comma sine, if I want sine of this coordinate point, I'm looking at the number 1. So I go down here and I'm going to write that this is equal to 1. Okay, let's do another one that's kind of goofy. Tangent of pi. Okay, so tangent of pi, let me erase all this. Okay, pi is right here. Well, here's another issue. If we're going off of this cosine comma sine, I don't have tangent. So we have to look back at our ratios. If I look at this other slide, you see this part right here where it says tangent, okay, is opposite over adjacent, yada, 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 right? We also at one point wrote on our unit circle that tangent is sine over cosine. We did that yesterday in our video. So what that means is for this tangent, I need to do sine over cosine, which in this case, sine is the 0 in that coordinate point, and cosine is the -1 of that point. Well, if you ask yourself, what is 0 divided by -1? That just gives me 0. Okay, let's do another one that's kind of goofy like that. These are the special cases. These are goofy. So if you remember, if you have questions, stop by in office hours and I can try to explain it a little bit better. Okay. All right, last one. It was cosecant of 0 radians or 0 degrees. I guess it doesn't really matter. So we're looking at this guy. Again, we only have sine and cosine, and I want cosecant. So what I do is I look back and I think about it and I go, okay, well, cosecant is the same thing as 1 over sine, right? So if sine in this case is 0, cosecant is 1 over that number. And if you had to reduce 1 over 0, remember how in math you can't divide by 0? That's not a thing. We talked about that in our rationals unit. That means this answer is undefined. Okay, so these special cases when we're talking about the unit circle and we're doing anything that revolves around these 4 special cases, that's when you have to refer back to these trig functions, okay? And then you have to use the fact that each of those 4 coordinate points are cosine comma sine, okay? And I know that's kind of weird, but that's just one of those things that kind of just gets memorized, okay? Let's check. Let's see if I made any mistakes like I did on our video yesterday. No, yay. Okay. I get stuck with these guys, with these questions too, you guys. Every year when I have to teach this, I take a step back and I have to kind of reteach myself how it all works because it really takes a lot of focus and it does take a lot of kind of drawing. Any way that you can use your unit circle to help you with that, like I've been using the highlighter to kind of help me. If you have like when I'm highlighting stuff and I'm walking you through things, think about doing that with your pencil and visualizing this number over this number, and that's where it comes from. And I think that will help you guys a lot. Okay. All right, so now you know how to do cosecant and secant and all that, and you also know how to do the special cases. You should be able to then spend the rest of your time today finishing up that homework assignment. Remember, like I said from yesterday, it starts kind of slow, And then as you get better and better at this procedure, you start to pick up the pace a little bit, okay? Make sure to take a picture of your completed assignment and submit that. And then you guys are done for my class until I see you again on Monday. So have a good weekend.